solving by completing the square. So when you are actually completing the square, you want to make sure your leading coefficient is 1. Your leading coefficient is the number that appears in front of your highest exponent. In this case, we're talking quadratics because it has the highest exponent of 2. So the number that appears in front of that variable with the 2. These are the steps that you want to actually pause and write down, or at the end of the video, if you still don't understand it when I demonstrate it, just rewind back and try to follow the steps. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that my variables are all on one side and my constant, which is a number without a variable, is on the other side. When I notice that my leading coefficient is in fact 1, then what I want to do is go ahead and start adding blanks on both sides. So I'm going to rewrite this particular problem, a squared plus 2a. And after that, I'm going to put a plus blank. And what I do to one side, I have to do to the other side. So another plus blank. And what you'll notice over here is this is my standard form. So I want to make sure that on the left-hand side or wherever my variables are, that it is in standard form. So at this point, I want to complete the square. So this is the square that I'm trying to complete. I have to use the formula that was provided to me, which is b divided by 2. Well, b is the number that is in front of my x variable, or in this case, a. So b in this case, including the sign, is 2. Well, the formula says b is divided by 2, and all of that is raised to the second power. So 2 is divided by 2, raised to the second power. Now, next to that, what I want you to do is mirror the parentheses in the square. So we're going to do a binomial squared. So that means I'm going to have 2 terms inside of this set of parentheses. Well, I'm going to take one of these variables, just one, because it's already accounted for on the outside with the square. Whatever this sign is, I'm going to go ahead and bring that down. And now I'm going to do the math over here. 2 divided by 2 is 1. Well, my formula told me to take that 1 and to square it. So when I do that, I'm going to actually complete my square. So that's where I'm putting, that's what I'm going to put in the blanks. So 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to do that on both sides. On the left-hand side, I'm done. It's in binomial squared form. So on the right-hand side, I just need to simplify. Negative 16 plus 1 is negative 15. So at this point, what I want to do is take the inverse of a square. I want to get rid of this square. So the inverse is to take the square root. Well, if I square root something, I know on the right-hand side or the side with the constant, I have to actually add a plus or minus and then square root it. And what I'm going to do now, the purpose of doing that was to actually get rid of the square and bring down the radicand, which is the a plus 1. And then I want to see if I can simplify the square root of negative 15. Well, the only thing I can take out is the I, and that's because I have a square root of a negative 1. And with the 15, I can't take anything out, so I'm just going to leave it under the radical. My a is not by itself. So in order to get it by itself, what I want to do is I want to switch this sign, and then I want to take the entire constant over and put it in front of my plus or minus sign. Remember, in front. So a is actually going to be negative 1 plus or minus I radical 15. And that's my final answer. Now you'll notice that I have 2 answers, or maybe you don't know that, but this is also in a plus or minus bi form. So the 2 answers are, let me see if I can highlight it for you here. Negative 1, if it will cooperate. Hold on. All right. So negative 1 plus I radical 15. That's one answer. And the other one is negative 1 minus I radical 15. If you wanted to write it separate, you could. It's not a problem. So I had 2 answers, and I already knew I was going to have 2 answers because that's what my highest exponent said that I would have. So moving on to the example 2. In this example, I notice it's not in standard form, nor are my variables all on the same side. So that's the first step. I want to move my variables to the same side and then move my constant to the other side. So I am going to move negative 63 over to the right. And I'm going to move the negative 20, which is the inverse is positive 20, over to the left. And when I do that, I'm not combining it with that c squared. I'm just trying to squeeze it in here. When I do that, I'm going to end up with 2c squared plus 20c is equal to, and over here I got rid of the variable, negative 63. Well, I cannot complete the square unless my leading coefficient is 1. So that's the step that said factor out a GCF if applicable. This is where I'm going to be factoring out the greatest common factor. And what I want to do is make sure whatever I'm factoring out is going to cause my leading coefficient to be 1. So we're going to factor out a 2, and I'm going to go all the way across. Even though negative 63 is not divisible by 2, that just means I'll have to work with the fraction. So now I no longer need the 2, but I have to simplify my fractions. And so for my first one, I'm left with c squared plus 10c. And since my leading coefficient is 1, I'm going to go ahead and add that plus blank is equal to, and then I can't simplify negative 63 divided by 2, but I still have to balance my equation, plus blank. At this point, I want to mimic or mirror my parentheses squared, but in this one, I already know it's always going to be divided by 2 because the formula says b divided by 2 squared. So I'm going to locate my b, which is just a number, and it's going to be positive 10. Over next to it, I'm always going to take the one of those variables, c, because again, c is already going to be squared here. And then I'm going to bring down this sign. And now I'm going to go back and do my math. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I can either look here and say 5 squared, or I can just go over here and do the math. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and then 5 squared. Well, whatever that answer is going in those blanks, both blanks. So I have a positive 25, positive 25. I'm finished on the left-hand side. And just by the way, so that you know what's happening, this is binomial squared, which basically just means c plus 5, in this case, times the quantity of another c plus 5. And if I were to multiply it back out, I'm going to end up right back where I started here. That is called a perfect square trinomial, because if I took the square root of the c squared, I'm going to get the c times c. And if I took the square root of 25, positive 25, I'm going to get the positive 5, positive 5. And if I added the 5 plus the 5, then what I'm going to get is the middle term, which is 10. So that is how you know that you're on the right track. So back to simplifying on the right-hand side. Now, some people don't know how to work with the fractions like this. So what you can do, I don't know why my computer is not undoing. There we go. What you can do is go to, if you're using the graphing calculator like we do in our class, you can just go here and go to alpha and then y equals, and you'll have an option for number 1, and just type in whatever the fraction was, negative 63, and I forgot what it was, over 2, arrow over, and then in our case, we wanted to add 25. So that's going to tell us negative 13 over 2. So I'm going to write negative 13 over 2 here. And now I see that I'm at a point where I can actually take the inverse of, what is going on? I can take the inverse on the left-hand side to get rid of this square. And now I can do the plus or minus over here, take the square root of the entire fraction. So this is the same as just saying, let me just show you a different way, the square root of the top and the square root of the bottom. It means the same thing. However, you cannot have a radical in your denominator. So we're going to rationalize it. How do you do that? You just multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the current radical that's shown in the denominator. When I do that, I'm going to have c plus 5 is equal to, sorry, I don't know why my computer is dragging. C plus 5 is equal to plus or minus. And now what I do is take out, since I have that negative, I'm going to take out an I. And then I'm going to multiply the 13 times the 2, but I have to leave it under the radical. On the bottom, anytime you multiply a radical times itself, the answer is going to be the radicand. So basically, it was the square root of 2 times 2, which is the square root of 4. Well, the square root of 4 is simply 2. Now I go back onto this side and I move it over in front of my plus or minus sign, but I'm going to change the sign. When I go across the equal sign, I have to change the sign. So this is -5 plus or minus I times radical 26, all divided by 2. Notice the 5 is not divided by 2. It's just the side that's after the plus or minus. So keep up with that as well. This is 2 answers. One is a plus, one is a minus. And then the last example. It's not in standard form. The variables are not all on the same side. So let's go ahead and try to do that. We're going to move this x squared over, line it up. And we're going to move the 10 over. I'll come back and do the other one in a minute, since I don't have enough room. So I'm going to get rid of the constant on the left-hand side, and I'm going to get rid of one of the variables on the right-hand side. So I have 9x squared, and I want to move this 27 over, so plus 27x. I'm just going to squeeze it in here, plus 27x. So that's what I'm bringing down. Is set equal to 10. Well, I notice my leading coefficient is not 1. So in order to make it 1, I want to divide it by this number. That's going to be 9, another 9, and another 9. When I do that, I'm left with x squared plus 3x, because I'm dividing, is equal to, and I can't divide 10 by 9, so I'm just going to go ahead and leave it as 10 over 9. Oops, let's go ahead and put our plus blanks. That was my fault. So once I see that my leading coefficient is 1, I'm just going to go ahead and put plus blank, and that's equal to 10 over 9 and another plus blank. You didn't have to do it in this step. I'm just trying to save steps. You could have done it in the next step. So using my formula, I'm going to go ahead and write this parentheses squared twice. Over here, I know I'm dividing by 2 because that's my formula. And my formula says to take b, which just happens to be a positive 3, divided by 2, and raise it to the second power. I'm going to take one of these variables. I'm going to take the sign that's shown here. And I cannot simplify that 3 over 2, so I'm just going to leave it as a fraction. Now I want to take the entire fraction and I want to square it. So then again, I'm just going to take one at a time. The numerator, 3 squared, is going to be 9. And then the denominator, 2 squared, is 4. What I did to one blank, I'm just going to do to the other blank. All right. So now the left-hand side is done, and I just need to simplify my fraction. So I'm going to go back to my calculator, and I'm going to type in alpha y equals, enter, and I'm going to enter in 10 over 9, arrow over, plus, and do the alpha and get my fraction again. And it was 9 over 4, 9 over 4. And my answer is 121 over 36. 121 over 36. So at this point, I see that I need to get rid of this square. So in order to get rid of the square, I have to take the square root. That's the inverse. What I do to one side, I do to the other. However, I have to remember plus or minus because that tells me I'm going to have 2 answers. So I'm going to take the square root of 121 and the square root of 36. The purpose of doing that was to get rid of that and bring down my radicand. So I am left with plus or minus. Now, square root of 121 is really 11. Square root of 36 is really 6. So I will change the sign and bring this over in front of my plus or minus. And so x is now by itself, and I have negative 3/2 plus or minus 11 over 6. Now you're going to be like, yay, I'm finished, but you're not. You don't have an I, so therefore you can simplify this. Let's go back to the calculator and let's go to alpha y equals, enter negative 3 over 2 plus, in one case, because we have two fractions here, what was it, 11 over 6? Yes, 11 over 6. So this is the plus one. So one of my answers is going to be, I'm going to put a set, you don't have to, 1 over 3. Now, if I go back and I use this subtraction this time, all I have to do is just go back up, highlight it, hit enter, arrow back over, and just delete that and change that to a subtraction. Now I have a negative 10/3. So that's my other answer, negative 10/3. So this is another way to write it. And you can clearly see that you have two answers. So again, you can go back up if you need to see the steps, if you did not understand step by step, if you wanted to just write it down. But in the meantime, thumbs up and subscribe. Have an awesome one.